and Emily McCullum. Ron and Emily formed the Heim McCullum Group at Merrill Lynch in 2009. As financial advisors, they have more than 60 years of collective experience offering transparent advice and guidance while helping people address critical crossroads in their lives. Today, they will be sharing their personal lessons learned and the importance of preparing for loss. And now I'd like to hand this webinar over to Ronald Heim and Emily McCullum.
Thank you. Emily and I do a lot of public speaking, educational seminars. We did one just last night. It's like second nature to us. I'm gonna kind of pre-disclose that this is the toughest one that I have ever done because it involves the loss of my wife. And since she passed away, I do what's pretty typical is hide in my cave. So this discussion is kind of taking me out of that cave a little bit. So please bear with me. I've kind of had to write some notes down to stay within the guardrails and stay focused. So thank you for attending today. Really, the purpose of this discussion is to tell the story about my experience in dealing with financial matters after the passing of my wife, Darolyn. We can't always be prepared for the unexpected, but by identifying and tying up loose ends while we're alive, it makes for what I call better grieving and reduces the stress of going through something like this. Darolyn loved to help others, and I think this is just one more way that she's doing that through this conversation. This discussion is not really to get into the technical or legal aspects of estate planning. We're not attorneys, and you really need an attorney involved to do that. And this town is full of fantastic estate planning attorneys. We know that because we work with so many. Okay, they are your essential advisor to getting things done correct, proper, and making sure things run smooth in an event like this. Okay, Emily and I like to look at our practice as a laboratory for retirement. So we see in that laboratory things that work well and things that don't, and we share those experiences with others. Well, the estate planning attorney has their own laboratory, and they've seen so many scenarios and situations that most likely they can help you customize what's unique to you and your family. Okay. A little bit of background. Darolyn and I had our first date on April 22nd, 2000. We still celebrated that date. So it's, you know, that's one of the celebrations that we had. She had a son, Cade, who's now at law school at Notre Dame when we first met. We got married in 2001, and in that same year, our son Alex was born. And we have an 18-year-old dog who probably is going to outlive all of us, Puppet. So we were one big happy family. Darolyn and I loved family things, and we loved our professions. Nothing could go wrong. We were immortal, you know. It only made sense for me to handle the finances, and Darolyn had no problem with that. I like to think of that as a pilot, co-pilot scenario. Okay, so Darolyn was a co-pilot, I was a pilot, and I flew the plane. And we never discussed cash flow or budget issues like we do with our clients. I ran the show, and things ran smoothly with our finances, and we were in good condition. So there was never really a need to address any important matters. We just did our thing. Okay. Now, COVID kind of changed some of those, and Darolyn, we were very different in a lot of approaches. Darolyn did not want to get COVID. Okay, if you've seen her in the car with a mask, and you should see my expression when, and her expression when I looked at her, she looked back at me, or you would get those daily texts with all the factual data, which I asked her not to send to me. My approach was different. I expected to get COVID. So what I did was I changed my lifestyle because COVID was really a game changer in my opinion. So I went on a diet and I exercised and I prepared myself to get COVID and fight it. So we took two different approaches. And during the first year of COVID, if you recall lockdowns and all the other things that were occurring, I said, I got to get out of town. I got to go somewhere else. So I went to Florida. Okay. Now, again, I'm expecting to get COVID. It's all over the news. The death toll are everywhere. So I felt it was my obligation to start to tie up some loose ends. And my belief, statistically, as a male, as a husband, I would go first. Okay. So I wanted to make sure she was okay financially and what to do if something happened to me, since I'm traveling really at the epicenter of COVID. So I told her, hey, look, you may be the pilot, and here's what you need to do. Make a few phone calls, everything is done. The colleges are paid for, retirement, you'll be okay. The budget, everything is on autopilot, no problem, just make some phone calls and you're done. Okay, and you can handle whatever comes after that. Okay. What I didn't do is wonder if she had gotten COVID or something, and what would the contingency be in my situation. So it was just me as the pilot taking care of everything, not really concerning myself if I lose my co-pilot. Okay. And then that has some implications. But those are not easy things to discuss anyway. Well, COVID starts to fade away. Our youngest son, Alex, is able to go to the mainland for school, and we're now empty nesters. And what we did for the first time is talk about our future. What will the 2020s be like? Because we're going from our 60s to our 70s. We never discussed passing away. We're getting sick. We only discussed the good things, which was more travel, the kids having kids, retirement down the road, advancements in our professions if we wanted that. So everything was all neat and green light. No worries about what if scenarios, talking about the difficult things. Well, I really can't begin to describe the multitude of emotions and thoughts that came up when Darolyn suddenly passed away. It was unexpected. It was a true shock. And I think the first emotion that I went through, the first emotion you may go through is, will Alex and I be okay? Now, being the pilot, financially, I was able to answer that question, yes. And if you know your finances are going to be okay, then you can deal with the other things. Okay, so I think that's also important in having discussions between you and your spouse, you and your significant other, you and your children. Okay, what issues might be around. Okay. I had assured Darolyn that she would be okay if something happened to me. The next, part of that was, what else is out there now? I've got to do something I wasn't expecting, is to figure out what Darolyn had or might have had that I didn't know about, because we really didn't discuss it. It wasn't part of my piloting job. And I've learned some things I want to share with you. Okay. Right now, we live in an online society. So statements, especially your financial accounts, don't come to your mail. They're online. Okay, so you may not know what's out there. And luckily, Kay was able to break the code to Darolyn's cell phone. And of course, she had all her passwords and accounts listed. And we were able to see what was out there. It could be something as simple as a credit card. That credit card has monthly payments or like for magazine subscriptions. Okay. And another thing occurred was she had a bank and a credit union account in her name only, where everything on our side was joint. She had them before we got married, so she didn't bother changing. Well, I have no access to those in her name only. Okay, and again, luckily that did not have an impact on our finances, but it could for other people. So we learned that it's important to begin that inventory. And if things are online, I believe more than ever, you need to share or give somebody the ability to access those accounts if something happens to you. Her friends would come up to me and say, what about the will? What about the life insurance? She always talked about life insurance. And I never heard that before. And so I had to go on a goose chase and make sure that she had no life insurance, or she does. She didn't. She did work on estate planning, I think, after her divorce, but never completed it or updated. So that those two things we looked at, wild goose chase, but didn't exist. It would have been nice to know that we discussed that and made sure, oh, by the way, I do have a will, or, oh, I have life insurance, whether we need it or not, it's out there. I also want to mention, okay, you can't get much done without a death certificate. And the death certificate, which I don't know what the problem is, took me 3 months to obtain. Okay. Now, again, it did not affect the operation of our finances, okay, but it might yours. So you have to prepare if an account is improperly titled or not correctly titled, that this you're waiting for a death certificate that can take many months so that you can update and change things in access control. Okay. The other thing I think is really important, I've learned from this, is we didn't discuss, and it's not easy to discuss because we're young 60s, we're still immoral. If I should pass away, here's what I want you to do. Here's how I want to be buried. Here's where I want my remains. Okay. She never talked to me about that. What kind of service she wanted. So again, we were very different. So when we got married, we had 2 weddings, okay, in the spirit of compromise. My wedding, there were 5 of us. Okay. Darolyn's wedding, if you knew her, there were 150 people. Okay. So when I had to go to the funeral parlor, luckily my sister-in-law was there because I said I wanted small and private. And the look of shock on my sister-in-law said, I made the wrong decision. It's got to be big and open. Okay. But we never discussed that. And what I found interesting was I told Alex and Kate, I don't know what to do with mom, what mom wants done with her remains. And Kate said, oh, she told me this is what she wants. Okay. And I found that interesting because Alex, my youngest, I told him what I want, but Darolyn and I never told each other. And I just think it's a difficult conversation, but it's a necessary one. Okay. Now, on December 9th, I suddenly became a surviving spouse or a single parent, a widower, and now a pilot with no co-pilot. That concerned me a lot, especially when it comes to estate planning. I cannot hand over my financial affairs and my wishes to a co-pilot. She's no longer there. So estate planning now becomes even more crucial. Okay. So I think you can do some when you have a co-pilot, but now when you are on your own, you really have to emphasize proper estate planning and really think about things. Within 24 hours of losing Darolyn, and that's probably because of what I do, as a profession, I had contacted my employer and my team and said, I want beneficiary forms for my retirement accounts changed. I don't think everybody would do that, but that was one of the things that kept me awake the first night or two. Within that week, I also contacted an estate planning attorney and set up a meeting. Okay. It's not necessary to say I need a trust or a will or I need estate planning. I had concerns and I wanted to kind of run them by this person to see what they would think I should do. I also know that it is very important when you're working with the estate planning attorney to give them as much factual data as possible, an inventory list. We call it a net worth statement. Everything you own, everything you owe, how to titles, how to accounts are entitled. Okay, so they get a big picture of that and how a plan might work. On the other hand, the concerns are very important. And that's very difficult sometimes for people to say, well, I don't know what kind of concerns I should have. So how do I articulate that to the attorney so they can draft something that means something to me in my situation? I'm going to give you a couple of them that I've gone through and even still going through, okay? Now, all of a sudden, I am very concerned about my premature death. Okay, I never thought I was going to die or I'll be 80 years old or something. Now I'm much more worried about something happening to me tomorrow, next week, next month, because I really need a plan, a contingency without my co-pilot. Okay. And time is of the essence. Okay. If I pass away without spending my money, my savings and investments, Alex at 21 probably doesn't have to work or may not want to work for the rest of his life, let alone have to manage a large, well, semi-large or, relatively large amount of assets at such a young age when he's got other things he should be focused on. Okay, I don't believe he's ready for that. Okay, so how do I take care of my children who may have to inherit more money than they're going to see until they're successful in their careers? This is a very important one, and I regret this probably more than anything. What would Darolyn wanted to do with our estate plan for Cade, my stepson? Okay. I really wish I could have that conversation with her because I have many different approaches to that. And he's got a father who will probably transfer wealth to him at some point. But what did mom and what did we want to do? So I've got to come up with some idea or run that scenario through the estate planning attorney to help me come up with a solution that I can check off, okay? Who will manage my assets if I'm no longer able to? And again, that could be next month, okay? Is it Alex? Is it Alex and Cade jointly? Or is it a third party? So they can continue with their lives without having to burden themselves running my finances, paying my bills, managing my accounts. Okay. And this one just came up when I was away in Florida the last couple of weeks because I got a chance to think about my estate plan, which is going to last beyond my lifetime. If you knew Darolyn, she had a very big personality, right? Yeah, a very big person. Everybody knew Darolyn. She had a very big personality. And what made me think of this estate plan is, and I think the two biggest regrets about losing her, she will not see her boys graduate college and law school. And more importantly, she will not be a grandparent. Okay, so, but I do have this intuition that one of our grandchildren, most likely granddaughter, is going to be just like grandma. Okay. It became important to me to add in my estate plan, I want to leave something for grandkids I don't even have yet. I may not have, in a decade, but I want to leave something with them because grandma really wanted to be a grandma. And I know there's a little Darolyn out there in the future. I hope to be able to see that. So that I want to leave something and I want that my wishes expressed in my estate plan. Okay. So working together as partners, whether that's spouse, significant other, and your children, will require some difficult, uncomfortable conversations we're not used to. But you have to participate in that to have a better outcome. Okay. I intend to talk to Alex when he's here this summer, about, hey, this is what happens if something happens to me. And this is what the game plan is for you. Okay. So that he has an understanding and then he will take those lessons in his experience. Okay. Now, my partner, Emily here, is here because she's got another story to tell that regards the importance of estate planning only under a different scenario. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
A granddaughter. Do you know how to do ponytails? We gotta get you,
A
we
working
gotta
mind.
get you up to speed. We gotta get you up to speed. So where Ron has had to deal and come to terms and figure out what life is almost literally overnight without his spouse. My journey has been a little bit different. I am married to a retired firefighter, and we have an active 12-year-old son. And you always hear about the different generations, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, the millennials, the Gen Zs. But I also identify with the generation of the sandwich generation. And the sandwich generation being the one where not only do I have a young active child at home that I'm responsible for, but I also have older parents that are at that phase in their life where I need to be the daughter and help where help is needed. And the last 14 years, they have needed a lot of help. We have been navigating with my dad, my mom's journey of going through Alzheimer's. She was diagnosed in 2009. I guess she wasn't diagnosed, but the first signs of her having difficulty started to show themselves in 2009 when she was just 65. And my mom was a very active, vibrant educator, school administrator, writer. She exercised, she did everything by the book. She had no other health conditions. And the first signs that we noticed was she always took pride in remembering every single student that had ever crossed her path. She recognized them no matter how old or how long it had been since they had been under her role as teacher or school administrator. And we would be out and about and she would recognize them, but now she couldn't recall their name. And myself, my dad, my brother, we had all started to recognize this, but we hadn't said anything to each other about it. And in 2009, she was diagnosed with breast cancer and she called a family meeting and she sat us down and we talked about her treatment and what she thought things were going to look like. And that was the first conversation of making sure the power of attorneys were in place and who would be the power of attorney, having the conversation of the advanced healthcare directive and who that individual would be, who she wanted to appoint as her healthcare directive. And then after those conversations were had, she said, and I also want to bring something else to your attention. I don't know if you've noticed, and she was fully aware of some mental changes that were occurring for her. And so we just talked as a family and we recognized it and we promised to be alert to it and have conversations as things started to show themselves and started to decline. And in 2012 is when she got the formal diagnosis of dementia. It wasn't Alzheimer's, it was dementia. And going through the stages there, and she was still able to lead a very independent and active life. By that point, my son had been born and she was my primary babysitter. When I was at work, when my husband was on duty, he would be away for 24 hours at a time. And at that point in time, we had a mother-in-law suite, and days that he was on duty, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, she would actually be with me all week. And I could not do and be where I am in my professional career without her love and support that she gave to us during that time. And finally, in 2016, as she continued to deteriorate, and it was a very textbook deterioration for Alzheimer's. That was the time we had to step in and say, Mom, it's time. We can't have you driving anymore. And she was quite pleasant about it. We were very lucky in that standpoint. She had recognized that she was getting lost and not able to drive the way she had wanted to drive. And she was worried for not only her own safety, but for others' safety. And so that was a very selfless act, we feel, because we know how hard it is, how hard it can be to tell your parent, we're going to take away your keys, because it's such a loss of independence at that time. But she was willing and made it very easy on us. And it was at that point in time where my dad really started to step up to the plate. And again, knowing the whole time that we had documents in place, power of attorneys, advanced healthcare directives, and wills in place for them, not having to execute on anything yet. But once she gave up driving, things started to pick up pace as far as her deterioration with the dementia towards this Alzheimer's diagnosis. And what we discovered was once we're baby monitors, we now were using the baby monitors to keep an eye on mom. If dad needed to step out of the house and go to the grocery store for something, he would put a text out to my brother and I and say, hey, just keep an eye on the cameras, keep an eye on mom, make sure, you know, if she's running the water, she turns it off, or if she's standing at the stove gets turned off. So it became a team effort as much as possible, but my dad bearing the brunt of being the full-time caregiver. We had to watch her go through a period of depression because unfortunately with this disease and its progression, the individual becomes fully aware that something is not right. And she was fully aware of things that she couldn't recall and things she wanted to do, and just even on a day-to-day basis. And so watching her go through a depression, but eventually she came out of that depression, and we realized it was because she no longer knew that she was having issues and couldn't do things for herself anymore. And so as much as it was a blessing for her and to be able to go through life now, loving life, we called it the no filter period for mom. She was very happy-go-lucky. She would talk to anybody and anything and have conversations with complete strangers. I now know why when you see your elders out walking around and their clothes are mismatched. It's because my dad would let her dress herself in the morning, and he would more often than not come upstairs and find her trying to put on her jacket over her legs and not understanding that a jacket belonged over her arms and not on her legs, things like that. But now was the time that we needed to actually start using some of these documents, going into the bank and making sure that I, who she had diagnosed as, or not diagnosed, I'm sorry, had documented as her power of attorney, not my father. And that being because having many family discussions and my father being okay with this, he knew that he was just as old as my mom. And at any point in time, something could happen to him as well. And we didn't want to have to go through the process twice. So she had appointed me as being her power of attorney and working side by side with my dad and helping him settle the financial matters. But it's been very humbling being her financial power of attorney, because my father at 81 today is completely independent. He still drives. He is still a tennis coach. He still lives completely independently as well. And I try as hard as I can to make sure that he understands he still has the lead on everything. It's just when it comes down to signing the checks for my mom's care, she's now in 24/7 care, signing those checks to pay the care providers, I'm the one signing the checks for her. As much as possible, I let him make the health decisions, but there are points in time where I am the one, as her advanced healthcare directive, I have to sign off on certain documents and make certain doctor's appointments. So it's been very humbling to make sure my dad knows that his spouse of 54 years is still his spouse, and having him play as much of an active role as possible. But at the same time, needing to step in when I need to step in under the documents that my mom executed before she was unable to execute these documents. And I'll sandwich generation with my parents, but I'll never forget the date, March 1st, 2018. My husband's parents also needed help at the same time. On March 1st, 2018, I got the phone call my father-in-law had been in a horrific car accident. Then on April 1st, 2018, my mother fell and broke her leg that required surgery. And we're still dealing with the ramifications that my father suffered from his car accident. And then on April 16th, 2018, my father-in-law passed away. And that entire time of dealing with my mom and dad, my father-in-law had been in and out of the hospital with end-stage lung cancer and COPD, and trying to help my mother-in-law navigate and manage and not knowing what to do. And I was not his diagnosed, or his, not diagnosed, that's the word of the day, but I was not his direct power of attorney. My mother-in-law was, but giving her the guidance because she had never been down this path before. And I will never forget the day that he passed on April 16th, that she looked at me and she said, he's passed. Who do we call? What do we do? And I looked at her and I said, good question. And I turned and walked out of the hospital room because nobody at the hospital had told us what to expect or what to do. And then helping her navigate those waters of what those next steps were, and then settling his estate. All the while, my mom, now in a giant knee brace, and trying to explain to her that she couldn't touch that knee brace, because she just wanted to take it off every day, and not remembering, not having the capacity to remember what she needed to do in order to have her leg heal. And as we've gone through this process, she then fell again and broke her hip, and that was during COVID. And putting my mother in an ambulance and sending her to the hospital in short-term rehab at a time where there could be no other contact, there could be no other family members. And again, relying on the documents and taking the daily phone calls, sometimes multiple daily phone calls, and navigating her care. And one of the blessings as we got closer and closer to her needing full-time care was we had done the legwork. We had visited various homes. We got to understand what the difference was between in-home care versus foster care versus skilled nursing care. And as much as possible, my dad wanted her at home as long as we could. And it wasn't because we couldn't afford it. It wasn't because the house wasn't set up for it. We had to finally make that decision and find a full skilled care nursing facility for her, because I couldn't get consistent care at home. And what was happening is the care that we did have, and as much as we loved them, if one of them called at 8 o'clock on a given morning and said, I can't come to work, there's been another issue, then the care would fall to my brother and I. And although we were able to help out, it wasn't something sustainable. And so then making the decision with my dad, who was not ready at that time, to say, okay, we need to move mom. And we were lucky that we found a place where my dad can live independently and my mom can be there with him, and we can have 24/7 care with her. And for the last almost 18 months now, she has been in the care of hospice, which has been a complete blessing. My dad has really been able to truly just be her spouse and sit with her in these final months. And we don't know how long my mom still has. She sleeps most of the day at this point, but she still has a fantastic appetite. And just continuing to be there and operating in her power of attorney and her advanced healthcare directive role, and helping my dad navigate and make as many decisions as he can, and just being the signing authority when needed. But what this has all done is it's brought up those conversations, and then seeing the unexpected that happened with Ron at the end of the year, unfortunately. But the blessing and the silver lining is my husband and I have been able to have the conversations and make our decisions and our choices of what we want to do and what we want to see and what we want for our son and what we don't want for our son, and the personal direction that it's taken for us. And where Ron is a decade older than I am, I also know that anything could happen to me too. At the end of the day, we could step off a corner and that could be the end of our life. And we're ready for that. And again, they're not fun things to think about, but what drives me is to know that if I can sit down and I can have these hard conversations, then I know once I'm no longer here, things will be there and things will be in place for my family and for my loved ones in the way that I would want them to be. And that's what brings me comfort. Are there any questions, Brian? Those are our personal stories. And to do what we do for a living, this really drives it home. Work keeps both of us grounded as we go through this. And the conversations that we have with whoever we come in contact with, it just makes it all that more impressionable to know that the shoes, we walk in those same shoes that people who come to us walk in every day. And like Ron says, we look at our practice as a laboratory, we draw on those experiences, and those experiences ultimately helped us where we each are in our own personal lives as well. So we thank the HSBA to allowing us to share our story. When Pat Malshimizu first started talking to us about all of this, and she just said, I think your message is just strong and powerful. And she asked us if we would be willing to share our personal stories. And we agreed to it because we understand how things need to be addressed. And going forward, like Ron said, he always knew if something happened to him, Darolyn always had me to lean on. I was one of those phone calls. And for my husband, it's the same thing. If something happened to me, he has Ron's number and that's who he's supposed to call. And it's not just about planning for your family, but it's planning for your practice, planning for your business as well. Your practice is your lifeline. It's what supports your family today. And part of what we think about is not only what do we need to do for ourselves personally and for our families, but what do we need to do for our clients? What do we need to do as a service to them? One of the big driving factors why Ron and I believe in the teaming aspect is because if something happens to us, one of us, the other one will be there. And we have an even bigger team behind the scenes that are there to support us. So think about that too, whether you practice in a large practice, you know, what is the contingency plans? And more importantly, if you're a solo practitioner, what are your contingency plans? And think about your clients. If something happened to you today, who would your clients turn to? Where would they go? That's part of, could be critical and is something that would make things go better in the whole planning process. It's not only for your family, but for your clients as well. Things to consider there.
We do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Any suggestion on how to have these difficult conversations? For example, whether spouse should like funeral service, final disposition, burial, cremation, etc.
I would do it over a meal, a dinner. And it kind of, it's an informal, casual atmosphere. Now we talked, when Daryl and I would have our date nights, we talked about travel or what's going on. But that would have been a good time to say, you know, hey, by the way, let's talk about this tonight. I think every relationship might be different, but just over dinner as a conversation. I wouldn't make it too dramatic, but I'd make it comfortable.
Yeah, use us as a conversation starter. Hey, I listened to this presentation today and these were some of the things and it got me thinking, have we thought about this? One of the guidelines that we always look at is, Ron mentioned a financial inventory. And when you look at, you know, how do you even start that? That can be overwhelming. But when you look at your financial assets, 4 questions. Do I understand who owns this? Is it myself? Do I own it jointly with my spouse? Does my trust own it? Who controls it? Who controls it if I can't control it? And the last one is who gets it? And if you can't answer those questions on that asset, then you know you should probably sit down and take a look at that in a deeper aspect.
Should I put my real estate into a trust? It's only in my name, so if I die.
That's a great question to be answered by the fantastic estate planning attorneys we have in this town.
There are no rights and wrongs. There are better and best. And what may be right for one person isn't necessarily right for another person. So that's why those conversations are encouraged to be had with an estate planning professional.
Other questions we see?
Other questions? No.
If you do have any questions though, please email webinfo@hsp.org and we'll be glad to forward them to Ron and Emily. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Emily, for your presentation today, and thank you everyone for attending. Oh, wait, we do have some questions that are coming up. There is one question. What services do you offer?
How do we do this without making this an advertisement for Emily and I, as opposed to public service? We basically do financial planning and advisory services. We specialize in retirement, and And we're trying not to make this a pitch for ourselves. So we're gonna kind of limit our answer, if you will.
Any suggestions for handling quarreling family members or disputes on decisions?
That's a great question, because that's a great question, because we deal with it. And again, the estate planning attorneys in town deal with not only quarreling family members, but how to prevent that, okay, through a strategy in the estate plan. But so I don't think there's one answer, but I would say sometimes it's worth the quarrel before somebody passes away than not than after they pass away and bigger fights occur. Okay, so my belief is if it's the parents giving out wealth, they should communicate their plan and strategy so that the siblings don't get the responsibility of what their parents decided. If that makes any sense.
But it's part of the difficult planning process and conversation, especially if there already is family tensions and family disagreements. But that becomes part of the planning process.
Do you need a death certificate before contacting Social Security?
You need a death certificate before you can act on anything. To have the planning in process is part of it. We encourage the planning because, like Ron said, it allows you then to focus on things that are more important at that time, the grieving process, the healing process, the emotional process of whatever it may be. If you have the planning process ready to go, once the death certificate becomes in play, then you can go through that operational process of starting to collect on your beloved's behalf.
Social Security was very interesting to me, because when I do my retirement planning, I based it on 2 monthly incomes at between age 68 to 70 that we would receive from Social Security. I had to readjust my projections because now I'm down to 1. Okay. When I did contact Social Security, they literally laughed at me because there is a clause where a survivor can get Social Security benefits. I vaguely knew about it. And when I had the conversation, the guy asked me, well, what's your earnings? And I told him, and he literally laughed and said, you're not getting anything. You saved yourself a phone call. Okay, so the House wins. Social Security won in Darolyn's case. But I believe that Social Security is made aware of somebody passing away automatically. I probably through the hospital in some case, but I did not have to use a death certificate in my situation because there's no benefits for me to get. Okay, and they are made aware of somebody passing away.
But the death certificate, even to go into the bank, if you're joint owner with your spouse on a bank account, to make any changes on that, the bank can't do anything until you have that death certificate. You can't claim life insurance benefits or any other retirement benefits until you have the death certificate.
Any recommendations for how to pay for long-term care, whether it's aging parents or in case of an accident or debilitating illness?
Lots of options. Again, it's not necessarily a one answer is the best answer for everybody. And this is where getting together with your financial professional and having that conversation is important.
A good example is if Darolyn and we self-insure, meaning Darolyn and I did not have long-term care insurance. We self-insure. We would pay for it out of ourselves. If you truly believe in long-term care, the earlier the better. Okay, because you're paying less. But at the same time, I could have bought a boat instead of paying for Darolyn's long-term care, because she never needed it. So had I paid for long-term care, or had Darolyn paid for long-term care, there's a possibility that that expense never would have kicked into a service for her.
And the other thing that goes hand in hand with long-term care is disability. If you have an event where you can no longer work or work in the fashion that you're accustomed to, looking at a disability plan as well. But again, disability plan being insurance or just having what is going to be that next step? What is that scenario? Having a backup to the backup.
The best answer would be priorities.
Yeah.
A good example of that priority is, well, do we pay for our kids' college, or do we do long-term care? Do we take a vacation, or do we do long-term care? So it's really identifying your priorities, because it's going to cost you something. Okay, and that way means you're going to give something up.
Next question. Do you keep bank account open in descendant's name for a certain period of time?
Personal experience, yes. You never know where a surprise is going to come out of left field, and you find an asset that you uncover a year later, and you need to have a check. The check pays into that individual's name. So until you have a good handle on all of the assets, a lot of times the recommendation is to leave a bank account open with that individual's name on it, as long as the institution is willing to.
Which is better as administrator, family member or third party? Are banks okay?
Yes and yeah. I think it's all situational. It's all situational. We know a lot of cases where family members do it, and they do it fine. I also have another situation, family members are doing a horrible job because they're fighting amongst each other. Okay? A third party, whether it's a bank or a trust company, they're more neutral, they're more consistent because they're not going to pass away. They're professionals and they have an obligation to perform, but there's a cost to it. So I don't think there's one best answer. Again, it's going to be situational.
To avoid quarreling family members, do you suggest robust discussion and communicate testamentary intent?
I like that. Yes. Yes. Because I think many of us, I would look at our parents didn't like to talk to our generation about their wealth and about their plans and about their beliefs or values on money. Okay, and they just, I know what my dad said, you deal with it, I'm gone. But I do know the problems that creates. So if it takes robust or it takes very mellow discussions, it's your money, it's your desires and wishes. I also personally believe it's your obligation to discuss that and to let your wishes known, so your family members have an understanding. This is my money and this is how it's going to be dealt with without blaming others. Let yourself be the bad person, okay? But it's your choice and your decision. Don't defer or pass on that decision to somebody else, because sometimes it's not an easy decision to make.
There's two ways to approach that. Are you the parent talking to your child, or are you the child asking your parent? And either way can be very difficult. As a parent, like Ron said, these are my wishes and I want you to understand my wishes. As a child asking the parent, we want to make sure we're honoring you and honoring your wishes. What do you want to see happen? Sometimes when you take that angle and that approach, it's not an attacking approach. It's not a greedy approach, which sometimes is the miscommunication either way.
Do you think sharing your will trust terms, i.e. who gets what before you die, is a good idea?
Part of that robust conversation. Again, it can be situational. For some people, they they want to, and for others, they don't. And again, it's situational and what is gonna be best for your family.
Right, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer because of the family dynamics. But let me give you a scenario that's very common in Hawaii, where the parents say, well, this child is more successful, they're an attorney, okay, and this one maybe is a school teacher. Okay, so we're gonna give more money to the school teacher than to the attorney. Okay, and then they pass away. And you would think, well, it makes sense from what they were thinking about, right? Well, what does the child think, like Emily said? Well, the child who's the attorney, who didn't inherit as much, says, oh, mom and dad didn't love me as much as they loved the other one. Okay. So sometimes, sometimes it makes sense to make it known, and say, hey, you want to be mad at me? Be mad at me. Sometimes it says you'll know when it's time to know. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. But just don't leave that scenario where one child feels that you didn't love them because of what you gave to the other, you gave out. That's not good.
Sometimes it's, even if the division of assets is going to be like that, because that's what your wishes are, leave a love letter, leave an explanation. This is why, right? This is why. And again, we're just here speaking from experience. Are we okay? We're frozen on the screen. Speaking from experience, and sharing what planning can do and what planning can help with to make a very traumatic experience go much smoother.
So video went down, but
Audio
audio
is still good.
Yeah,
Okay,
audio
good.
is still good. So we'll continue with the Q&A
Oh,
until 1.
Okay.
Any suggestion on how to address grieving process?
Oh,
yes. The first conversation I had with my 2 boys is I gave them a homework assignment. Name the 5 to 7 stages of grieving. When I pick you up at the airport, you need to be ready to answer those questions. Okay, grieving is a very unique emotion, and based on so understand what those stages are, or what those grieving aspects are. Very, very important. One of them is depression. Okay, if you look at the 7 instead of 5, you don't want to be depressed, or you need to be prepared for that. Okay, so I would say make sure you and your loved ones understand what grieving is, because it's kind of taken down to a science and broken down into different emotions, and be prepared to deal and discuss them, especially for children. I talked to you earlier about my granddaughter. I want to see Darolyn again, and that might be through my granddaughter. That is a form of grieving where that's called bargaining. Okay, so when I thought about that, I really got this intensity of saying, yeah, my granddaughter is going to be I'm going to see little Darolyn again with that personality. But that's part of what's known as bargaining, and you're trying to, hey, I'm going to see her again somehow. Yes, please, you shouldn't understand those stages of grieving. That's a great question.
Did you give the power of attorney to the hospital once they were completed, or waited until it officially went into effect?
Not the power of attorney. We gave all of my mother's doctors the advanced healthcare directive. The power of attorney is more of a financial document. So the hospitals and her doctors didn't need that. I've only used the power of attorney for financial things, executing check writing. There was a process of selling a home. And so I was signing on behalf of my mother for that, and the power of attorney was needed then. But the advanced healthcare directive, as soon as it was executed, we made sure that we gave a copy to all of her current doctors. And whenever a new doctor was introduced, my father always had it in her extensive medical file that he carried around with him. Now that she's in hospice care, it's not needed. Hospice has it, and that's where we're at now.
Only one enough time for one more question.
Okay.
If descendant passes in this state,
intestate.
How is the estate's administrator or executor selected? If you addressed this early, I apologize, I signed it.
So if somebody does not have a will, and who names the executor?
If the descendant passed intestate, how is the estate's administrator or executor selected?
Chosen at that time. So again, this is where if our client came to us with that situation, we would have to defer it to the estate planning attorney. And even if there wasn't an estate planning previously in place, that would be the time when one would need to be found. And a relationship established to help the family get that question answered.
Just at about at 1 o'clock. Thank you everyone for participating. Thank you, Ron and Emily. Again, if you do have any questions, please email webinfo@hsva.org and we'll be happy to forward them to Ron and Emily. Thank you, everyone.